viewer request says, get a better mic. Okay, I've got a better mic. Secondly, there was a little issue on explanation on the lift kit. But that video is like quite old now. So I'm gonna do the new modern version of the lift kit and explain why the front axle and the rear axle are different and why you should only lift the rear axle. Well, put it this way, change the shock absorber so you get more droop out of the rear axle. So let's get technical. I'm going to take the body off, take the wheels off, put it onto the 3D printed TRX4 stand. Then I'm going to take the shock absorbers off, or disconnect the shock absorbers, and we're going to measure how far the axles actually can droop down. Ooh, Jesus. Okay, I've placed the TRX4 onto the stand and disconnected all the 4 shocks and let the axle droop down as far as possible. I'm going to level out the axles, front and rear. There we go, just about like that. So the front axle to the bottom has a height of 6.5, and the rear axle, hang on a second, this just moved a bit, has a height of 3.5 centimeters. So there's a difference in droop of 3 centimeters. So to explain what a lift kit does to the front axle, the first setting where the screw sits is about 1 centimeter, and the highest setting is about at 2.5 centimeters. Looking at the droop of the axle, once I've disconnected the shock absorber and let the axle drop down as far as it can go, positioning the lift kit in its place, you can already see the first position. Hang on, this is not sitting properly. That's where it sits. The first position is 1 centimeter from its original bolt. So this is a suspension lift of 1 centimeter. You can already see by trying to get the shock absorber into its place, I'm pushing the axle down. That means there's no more droop. That is the limit. So my recommendation is do not put a lift kit onto a stock axle. Now, because the rear axle has a lot more droop, you can actually do a complete different setup on the rear axle. So what I've done, I've changed the original shock mounts and I've replaced them with shock towers. The shock towers allows me to put the shocks in different positions. So I have been playing around, I have been testing, I have another video on that. It is called lift kit versus shock towers, where I play around with the front and the rear axles until I actually come to a very, very nice mix using stock parts. So the position that I have chosen is this one here. I'm just going to tighten it a little bit. And what that actually does, it drops or lifts the suspension by approximately 1.5 centimeter and takes the shock from its original position about 1.2 centimeters further to the front. So swinging shocks more to the front allows more articulation on an axle. So I've gone from this position to the front, not a lot because we are still running stock parts, and I've lifted the suspension in brackets by 1.5 centimeters. So by taking the shock absorber down by 1.5 centimeters should actually give me a lift on the rear of the car by 1.5 centimeters, which would theoretically make the car stand a little bit skew. But what I've done instead is I've softened the spring, the pressure on the spring. So when the car stands under its own weight, the chassis still stays straight, but it has more droop going downwards than it had before. So let me put everything back together. So I've mounted the shocks again. So comparing the droop front axle to rear axle, in the front I have 7 centimeters, in the rear I have 6 centimeters. So the rear has a centimeter more droop going downwards. So to prevent the car from standing at an angle, or the chassis standing at an angle, you need to soften the rear springs. So once the car is under its own load, the chassis actually stands straight again. So in the front, I have pushed, I'm going to measure to the corner of the housing. So in the front, I have a distance of 1.7 centimeters, and in the rear, I have a distance of 1 centimeter. So once the car actually stands under its own weight, the suspension compresses and the chassis stands straight. Let me put the wheels back on and show you what I'm on about. So with the wheels back on, you can see I cannot get my finger under the rear wheels, and in the front wheels there is enough space. So that means I have more droop on the rear axle, I have softer spring setup on the rear axle, and a little bit harder spring setup on the front axle. So taking it off the stand, compressing the car, you can see it actually it does drop down just a little bit. And once it's dropped down, you can see the car stands straight. So a quick run through. Front suspension in the original position, 1.6 centimeters of spring load on both sides, measured with the caliber, 1 centimeter on the rear, but I have a different shock absorber position than the original. So what this setup does, say now my fist is a rock, I am ground out with the chassis on the rock. In its original position, the shock absorber will actually pull the tire up by 1 centimeter. So the rear tires would be in the air, allowing just a little bit of wheel spin on the front and no grip on the rear. Now, all 4 tires have grip. They are on the ground and they will push the car over the obstacle, although it is ground out, giving you a higher suspension without actually lifting the suspension up, because in its normal driving position, the height of the car is actually still the same as original. So let me quickly sum up what I was talking about. Front axle, original position with a little bit more spring load, still allowing the car, once the body is on and it's under its full weight, still allowing the car to actually have up travel. It's not bombed out or based out completely and it's as high as it can go. I still have up travel, although the car is standing in its position, there is still up travel in the suspension. On the rear, I have a shock tower, mounted the shock a little bit more forward, like 1 centimeter more forward and 1.5 centimeter more down, to actually get contact while I'm hooked up on an obstacle, to still have contact on all 4 tires. So putting the body on, I do have that droop in the rear axle, allowing it to go over bigger obstacles. Now, and that is without raising the suspension and making the car top heavy. And to make this run a little bit smoother, you take the oil out of the original oil out of the shocks, which is a 30 weight oil, and replace it with a 10. The 10 weight oil just makes everything run so much smoother, and the weight of the car actually moves the shocks a lot faster and a lot easier. So guys, if you want to run a different suspension setup, try this out. This really works well. I'm absolutely happy with the performance of the car, and it is really a massive improvement to the original. So nice up travel, nice down travel. All in all, perfect. Oh, my finger is just... Jeez, that was complicated. I know you guys are getting a headache. Let's go outside and let the car do the talking. out that droop on that rear axle. Perfect grip. So even with muddy tires, that suspension just crawled over those wet rocks. Great droop, great articulation, making this quite a nice setup for your TRX4. So that's it for me this week, guys. Thanks for watching. Check out the links to my other videos that I will put down in the description, and I will see you next week. Bye.